Hi, everyone. Welcome to Homespun, where creativity and community come together. I am your host, Misty Doan, and today I'm joined by Vanessa Goertzen, the creative powerhouse behind Lella Boutique, and she is going to share with us how to avoid burnout, find balance, and constantly be evolving as a creative in this industry. Vanessa, thank you so much for being here with me today. I am so excited to sit down and talk to you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a big
Oh,
fan.
oh, well, thank you. Ditto. I love your work. And so this is really fun for me to be able to sit and chat with you about your story. And so you have been with Moda for over 10 years now. Is
Yeah,
that right?
that's right. That's right. It's crazy, and I still pinch myself about it every day.
Oh, I'm sure. I was going to ask. It has to be kind of a dream come true. I've always wanted to design fabric, so I'm a little jealous that you get to, but I get to enjoy
Oh,
your
yeah.
beautiful work. So it's so amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
So
it's funny to me for sure.
yeah, so let's back up because how did you, first get started in quilting? Because you started with quilting, not with fabric design. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I started at a
Okay.
really young age. And I think I have to back up even further because I've been going to quilt shops since I was in my mother's womb.
Oh,
And
I love that.
my mother is just one of the most creative people I know, truly. She grew up on a ranch. And so not only is she creative, but she's very inventive. She's good with power tools. She's good with do it yourself projects. She cooks, she plays the piano, she's a painter. Like she does it all. So growing up in my household, I was just surrounded by this sort of stuff. She used to tell me how she would sew clothes for her Barbie doll, like literally there's no craft she hasn't touched. I grew up cross stitching and watching my mother, she was in the industry and would create a lot of projects for fabric manufacturers, ribbon manufacturers. And so it was cool to witness her getting these boxes of new things with no instructions on what to make, but she just had to come up with projects to help them,
Mm-hmm.
market these products. And so as a little kid, I would play in her fabric stash and I loved the way fabric made me feel. And it was so fun to just curate my own little bundles and just see what looked good together and create a mix. So I have grown up being around it and always loving it. But quilting didn't begin for me until I was about 14. For whatever reason, I had no desire to get into quilting or sewing or anything until one day my mom was working on a project and it was this beautiful sunflower mosaic. And I've seen projects using a similar method since, but it's basically using like a fusible grid. And she would
Mm-hmm.
lay out these little squares and it formed this beautiful sunflower image.
Oh, I love that.
And at the time, I was so in love with sunflowers and what they represent. And so it took the right project to say, I have to make this. I don't know. It was somewhat small. So I thought, well, maybe I can make it bigger and make it more like a lap sized quilt, but I have to make this. So that's where the bug started for me. I was 14. And since then, I just realized I just liked figuring out, looking at fabric, like what kind of a personality did a collection have? What might it want to be made into? And I would think about the different shapes and things and just kind of play. So
I love that.
that was the beginning.
I love that. And I love that it started at such a young age. I can really relate. I grew up surrounded by really crafty women, my mom, both of my grandmas. But much like you said, like there was nothing that they couldn't do. And so I think when you grow up in that kind of household with that example, it's like really inspiring, but also a little bit dangerous because you're just like, the world is your oyster. You could do
Oh,
what
yeah.
whatever your heart desires. And I think it's really like now on the flip side, I'm so incredibly grateful to have had these generations of women who came before me that were so empowering for me and to get me where I am. And it sounds like we have that in common. And so now I want to meet your mom. How cool.
Oh, she's amazing. Well, and on to your point, at the time, my mom was a big authority in cloth doll making. She had written
Mm,
several books. She was holding these doll making seminars. I think she even brought to one of my school classes some cloth dolls for us to paint the faces on and like
Uh-huh.
dress with scraps and things. And so I have classmates that remind me of that kind of stuff. And but growing up with it, it was so normalized. I remember the first time I walked into a quilt shop and found pre-cuts and started
Mm.
playing with those. The most natural thought in the world to me was, oh, one day if I ever write a book, I would love to write them about charm packs or pre-cuts, and it wasn't an odd idea to write a book at
Right.
all.
Yeah, I love that so much. Well, speaking of which, I think you've written more books, but two in particular have been super successful, right?
Yeah, I have
You're,
two, and I
okay.
would love to write more. I've done one on charm packs, I've done one on jelly rolls. For me, it's kind of a time thing because in such a short amount of time, you have to make all these quilts and design them, and I'm pretty protective of just my creative energy, and it's like
Mm.
I'm not going to bite off more than I can chew. I've just learned the hard way. Like when I'm overextended, I'm not happy with that. So I haven't
I lo-
written another book in a while.
yeah, that I actually love that you said that because that's been something that I've been on that journey myself lately to try and find that healthy balance. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you kind of came to that
Yeah.
realization?
Oh, I would love to because I think, you know, I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about the 10,000 hour rule.
Hmm.
I think some people are probably familiar with that, but a lot of times when you see someone who is excellent at their craft, an expert, they have put in 10,000 hours. That's how many hours they think it takes.
Hmm.
So there were many years starting out before I was even with Moda where I was just, grinding and trying to figure out like what I wanted to do. There were many years where there was no profit in business at all for me. Um, but especially when I started with Moda, I got divorced around the same time.
Mm.
And I had these two little kids, and I had them the majority of the time, just logistically, that's how it worked out. And so I was taking care of little kids during the day, and there wasn't much I could get done outside of that. And then I was working from about bedtime for them until maybe 1 a.m. I figured out if I could at least go to bed at 1 a.m., and get 7 hours of sleep, then I would be okay. So it was
Yeah.
crazy. But also in this industry, a lot of times what I'm creating today, I'm not going to see a paycheck for like 6 months to a year just because of production. So I
Yes.
was like stressed out as a divorced mom and like head of household and trying to like put as many things in the pipeline as possible. And I had to do it. But after several years, when I finally figured out, like, okay, I'm okay, like, I'm getting more established, like, this has been pretty consistent. At that point, balance became more of a goal for me. And so I started saying no to a lot more things than I used to. I used to say yes to everything because I just needed all of that to get going. And it's been really nice. And I feel super privileged to be at a place where I can say no to anything I don't want to do
Hmm.
and just really stick to the basics of what I want. But it takes a while to get there in this business because so many times you have to really get momentum going to build your following and everything else.
Absolutely. You have to put all that initial legwork in. And unfortunately, at least for me, I got into the habit of that sort of hustle culture, which is very
Mm-hmm.
healthy when you're building something, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
sustainable forever. At least for me, it's
Correct.
not. And
No,
so
and it's not.
yeah, I love that you brought that up because I think it's a good reminder to everyone that like sometimes you need that hard reset to say like this is not actually going to work and I
Oh
know that I
yeah.
love what I do and I want to keep loving what I do. So how do I protect that?
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said,
The burnout is real.
it is real, especially for creatives. I mean, it's so
Hmm.
easy when you're constantly giving creatively and putting things out into the world and um, that in and of itself can be really, emotionally draining. But then, the pressure can sort of build as well. And so giving yourself that moment to breathe and say, all right, am I proud of this work? Is this the best I can do? And like having that space to do it, like you said, is a privilege, but it's also, I think, a really pivotal turning point in every creative's career.
Yeah.
So,
So now like my life looks a lot different than it did when I was first starting out. And so I have found for me, it's really important to like exercise. Like a lot of
Yeah.
what we do is very sedentary, even just quilting itself, but also the design work. I'm sitting at a computer, I'm on
Yes.
my iPad drawing, and so exercise is important, going on vacations and just really striking that balance so you don't get burned out because there are designers I talk to and I know they feel the burnout
Mm.
and sometimes at that point, they feel like they have to force it. But the best thing you can do is take a break and like get away from it and do something else and get your mind something else or
I think
elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. I have found that to be 100% true in my own career. It's like all of a sudden if things are not feeling, good, if I feel like I'm pushing things out and I'm not proud of my work, that just sort of snowballs into this really negative place and I know I don't want to get there. And so giving myself time to step away, step back, kind of reassess what I'm working on and reprioritizing the things that are really valuable to me as a creative has always paid off in the long run.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
absolutely.
true.
So let's circle back to your fabric design because I just
Okay.
absolutely love all of your fabrics. And one of the things that I think is really, really cool that I admire about what you do is you have this sort of signature look. I feel like all of your collections are easy to identify as yours. How did you establish your what you wanted, I guess, for your style?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's a huge compliment because that's definitely something that is a big goal for me because you
Yeah.
have a lot of designers in the industry and it's like the question I'm constantly asking myself is how do I stand out? How do I,
Mm-hmm.
become recognizable? Because the other thing with my designs is I don't have a signature color palette
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. And that's one thing I really worked hard for from the beginning because most designers sort of have a set color palette that they're recognizable for.
Right.
And Moda was
Especially
kind of
at
asking
Moda.
me,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And they were sort of asking me about that sort of stuff. And luckily I had basic gray to sort of look up to because I'm a consumer just as much as I am a designer or creator. And one thing I have always admired about basic gray is you never really know what you're going to get with our collections. It's always fun. It's always different. And so she is someone I have always looked up to. And so I kind of knew from the beginning I wanted the same sort of thing because my tastes change. I
Sure.
love so many different color palettes. And so I didn't know like would I be able to be recognizable, but I think just because a lot of my collections are very floral centric and because they're made in my hand, I think after a while people sort of get what the aesthetic is for me.
Yeah,
So
and it
I love
definitely
hearing
carries
that.
through. Oh, well, like I said, it's
Thanks.
it's undeniable for me. Like I can see it and I'm like, "Oh, that's Lella Boutique." I know it is.
Oh,
So,
that's awesome. Yay.
I love that. So speaking of, can you talk a little bit about how you chose the name for your design?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's kind of funny thinking back now because I had no idea I would be designing fabric or doing any of this. I probably would have picked differently, truthfully. But starting out, I was kind of, well, let me say this. My ex-husband was in law school at the time when we were married, and I had a new baby, and I felt a little bit of pressure to work, but
Mm.
it was really important for me to be at home with her. So I felt some pressure to maybe earn some money. So I was trying to kind of figure out how I would do that. And, this was about 15 years ago, and blogging was at its peak, I would say. So I
Yes.
started out with a blog. And as I was trying to figure out a name, I kept coming back to my childhood and how magical my mom just always made it feel. And so I wanted something that was going to conjure up those feelings of like magic and whimsy. And I kept thinking about this dress that I had as a toddler. I loved Cinderella, and I had
Okay.
this pink dress. And so I would call it my Lella dress because I
Oh,
couldn't speak. I
cute.
was real little. But I would just like twirl around in that thing for hours. So I took that part of it as Lella, and I don't know why I did boutique. I'm like, I'm not a boutique, but I just
Hey,
didn't know. And so yeah, so that's kind of where the name came from.
Well, I love that. I love that connection to your childhood. I had no idea. That's really fun.
Oh,
So,
thanks.
and like a nod to the, the magical, empowering environment that your mom created too, which is really,
Yeah,
really admirable. So, super
thanks.
fun. So then, as a new designer, like when you first started, do you have any advice maybe that you could share with others who have similar ambitions? Like you now have this really recognizable brand that you have built in the fabric industry. And so I'm sure when you began, you didn't feel as confident. So what would you share with others who are
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
on a similar path?
Well, so a couple things here. I think the advice I would give people is what, you really want to stand out. There are so many designers already, so you have to think about what isn't out there already. Like what can I create that's new? How can I stand out? Because you do want to be recognizable. And so that's a big focus for me in terms of that question. Starting out, I definitely wasn't sure because I don't have a background in graphic design. I went to Quilt Market in Salt Lake a while back, and that's when I noticed, some of these designers are younger. They don't have, a degree in fabric or textile design. So I thought, well, maybe I could do it. And so I kind of tinkered around. I had access to Photoshop, and that's it. And by then my baby was not really napping multiple times a day. So I thought, well, how can I do this? I can't go to school. My husband's already in law school. Like we can't afford it. We're, poor
Right.
students. And so I wanted this goal, but I was like, how do I get from A to B? Like that's just a huge leap. So I was like, you know what? I will spend 5 minutes a day on something towards this. It doesn't matter. And I knew that setting a bite-sized goal like that was going to turn into more. Chances are I sit down for 5 minutes and that turns into a half hour, an hour, whatever. So I remember one day I ordered a book about textile design. That's all I did that day, from Amazon. And then, I just started tinkering in Photoshop a few minutes every day and just trying to figure out the program. The book kind of walked me through how to create repeats. And so I was just really playing around, and I played around for about a year. And then I I knew I wanted to be with Moda from the get-go. I mean, I just was such a big consumer. They are the manufacturer I was always attracted to. I loved the designers. Um, so obviously that was the goal. So one day I just decided to turn in a proposal. I found the information online for the design director, and I submitted it, and I got an email from her, and she said, "Oh, thank you for your submission. We are not looking for any new designers at the moment. And, thanks."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, if it was good enough, they would make room. So I
Mm,
need to go back to the drawing board. I've learned a lot. Like, this has been a huge learning curve over the last year. I'll scrap this and start a new collection. And so I did. And I started playing around. And after about 6 months, I just had this feeling one day, like, you should turn it in today. I was
mm,
like, yeah, I guess, I'm just playing around at this point. So I turned in that collection, and I had also gotten advice like, instead of just turning in these swatches, you should also plug it into a quilt design so they can see how
sure.
you imagine it being used, which I thought, of course, yeah. So I turned that in, and the next morning I had a response, and they said, it kind of cracks me up. She said, we remember you. It looks like you're improving. And I thought, oh no, like this doesn't sound good. But she said, we'd love to give it a shot. Go ahead and send in your files and paint chips. And I thought, oh shoot, they're gonna
Oh my
catch me.
gosh.
Like I don't actually know what I'm doing. Like I don't know if my files are good. Is she talking like really paint chips? Like, and I just thought, oh shoot, I feel like I can't ask her these questions, like maybe I
Mm-hmm.
should know all this already. So I definitely went into it very unsure. I mean, and now, and I saw that you had Deb Strain on. As you know, Moda will take whatever we send to them and work with
Yes.
us. They are so wonderful to do that. And luckily, I didn't know at the time, but I was okay with how I had done it and everything.
Mm,
So I turned all that in. My first collection didn't do great. There were some changes we made with color that in the end I wasn't happy with. And I sort of, I didn't speak up as much because I just thought, well, I'm the newbie here. Like I'll kind of
Mm,
let them take over. And what I realized from that experience was like, no, I'm the designer. Like, if
yeah.
I don't want that
Trust your
color in,
gut.
I really need to like speak up and, within reason. Sometimes it's like, yeah, you know what, they've got a good point there. But I ended up not loving my first collection because of some of the things I didn't pipe up about.
Mm,
And so now as time has come along, I've gotten, you know, I know what I want and I know that I should go with that. And they've learned to
right.
trust me on that as well. So it's been great. But initially the first couple collections I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work out. And
Mm.
which is okay. Like there's so many different ways to have a place in this industry and just create. Like we all do this just because we love it. And there's a lot of different ways to go about being in the industry.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the things I've enjoyed the most about these conversations I've had is you see everybody has kind of their own unique path to get from point A to point B in this industry and in this space. And it's a great reminder to all of us that there is room for everyone. I have a
Mhm.
friend who she often talks about people either have an abundance mindset or a now I've just lost it. But
Scarcity.
basically, a
Scarcity.
scarcity mindset,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think it's really easy to feel like there's not enough to go around, or that it needs to be super competitive and we have to get something before somebody else. And the facts of the matter are, it's just not what I've found. Like there is so much
Yeah.
room and so much talent, and so the more that we can, lift others and encourage others, like the greater the industry is going to become, because we get this amazing variety. And I love what you shared about like trusting your instincts and being unique to who you are and bringing that to the table. And so, do you have any more specific advice? I know you talked a little bit how you had to learn to speak up, but how did you really find your style that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with the first couple collections, it's definitely a huge learning curve because you're picking out paint chips and then you're turning them in, and sometimes when you get the actual fabric back, you go, oh, I wish these colors were more muted, so I feel
Mm,
like it really took a couple collections to fine tune that. And I have a lot of respect for people who already like know how to do all of that. And that's something that has always been a little more difficult for me, but I feel like I really finally kind of started figuring it out with my third collection. I was really happy with how it turned out. And what happened with that collection, rather than turning in paint chips, what I did was I went and had it printed out at Kinko's.
mm,
And I found that I actually loved the way the colors printed out. They were exactly what I wanted. So I went off the paper and I said, just match
mm,
this. Like, don't
mm.
worry about paint chips. I don't want to find paint chips. I might mess it up,
Yeah.
because it's just funny how when it's a lot more difficult than you would ever expect. And that's the funny thing too about when I was, kind of in those early stages going, I don't know if I'm going to have longevity here. In some ways I was like, that's okay because this is way harder than I ever anticipated that it would be.
Mm,
Um, but, I think my process changed over time as well. So I think it's okay if you don't know everything up front. It's really fun to just grow throughout the process. And it's funny now to look back at some of my early collections and I go, I can't believe, like, oh, you can kind of see my progress if you look at my collections. I started out physically drawing things, scanning them in, creating a stamp, and sort of, because I didn't have any way to draw directly into a program. So, I
sure.
had this kind of whatever method. And now I'm at the point I use an iPad Pro and I just draw everything directly in. And so I've streamlined my process and I know what works for me. I'm still learning. There are different programs I'm finding all the time, like, oh, that's when I get time, I would like to start incorporating some more knowledge about this over here. So I think that's what's really fun is there's always growth. You're never going to know everything, and that's not how it's supposed to be. Like we don't want to be
Right.
stagnant.
No, absolutely not. Well, and I love that too. Like, I didn't. I guess I didn't consider the fact that you would have hand drawn and scanned it in, like, all
It's
those years
not the
ago.
best way to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it's
I
like I
probably would have
literally had,
approached it the same way. I mean, you're just trying to get from point A to point B. So
yeah.
yeah, I love that. And to, kind of acknowledge that growth and be able to look back through your collections and be like, man, look how far I've come. That's a
Yeah.
really, really amazing thing. So
Yeah. And I'm super
let's,
grateful to Moda for taking the
yeah.
chance,
Oh, absolutely. And
Like,
it sounds like they've been an incredible partner to you along the way,
yeah.
which is so wonderful to have that support and someone kind of encouraging you and reminding you like, no, you've got this, you can do it. So
Yeah.
that's amazing. So let's talk about your quilt designs themselves because they are all so stunning. And like you said, you grew up from the time you were in your mother's womb visiting quilt shops. So how about that process when you started designing quilts? You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that has also changed a lot because, like I sort of explained, I used to start with the fabric, and I would, you know, curate a bundle or whatever, and I would kind of study the fabric and go, I would kind of think on it a few days, like, what does this want to be made out of? What kind of shapes,
Mm.
and usually the ideas would come to me by looking at the fabric. Well, as I've become a fabric designer, most of the time we do not have the fabric in our hands until after the designs are due. And
Mm.
so we're doing it a lot differently. We're having to mock them up, and sometimes we don't even have the scans right away. So, it's different, but there's a lot of different ways to come up with ideas for quilts. The fabric is certainly one, but also for me, um, the pre-cuts are another fun challenge for me. And
Absolutely.
as much as I'm a creative person, I also think of this as a very scientific sort of problem solving job. It's like, how can I take this stack of 10-inch squares and turn it into a quilt? Like, how many different ways can I cut this up? And so
You're
it's a really
speaking
fun.
my
Could I make a
language.
flower? Could I make a
Yeah.
flower out of a layer cake? Let's try
Yep.
it. So it's fun to challenge yourself. Like, I need a jelly roll quilt. Okay, so what different things could I do? And that's the challenge I hit on with fabric, but also with quilts. It's like, what hasn't been done? Because there is a lot that's just done over and over, and we're all working with the same shape. So
Sure.
sometimes it is really hard to find something that's different. So it's a fun challenge for me. And so a lot of times I'll sit down for a collection, and I would ideally like to make one that uses a fat quarter or fat eighth bundle, a layer cake, a jelly roll, a charm pack. But sometimes I think the collection I just finished designing quilts for, they're not out yet. I think almost all of them are fat eighth, fat quarter, and I was like, dang it,
Mm.
I wanted to hit more pre-cuts, but this is what came out. Like, I just had
Sure.
ideas for more of how I wanted the fabric to be used, and that's just how it ended up. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I just kind of go with whatever comes together a lot of times.
I love that. So I think that, at least for me, in the conversations I've had with people in the industry thus far, you are unique in the fact that you design both the quilts and the fabric. And so I'm wondering, does it ever go in the reverse, like where you have this idea for a quilt, but you don't have the fabric you want to make it the right way, and so
Yeah.
then you design for that?
Oh, sure. Well, sometimes even just as I'm designing for a collection, I'll have an idea, I'll mock up the quilt, and once I've, put the fabric in, I don't love it. Or
Mm.
maybe I just have more designs than I could possibly use. So I will set some aside. And as the next collection comes along, I'll plug it in and see if, oh, is this the right fit? Not yet. And so sometimes I have ideas that sit for a while until the right collection comes. But I'm doing so many different collections at this point that I usually don't know what quilts I'm going to make before I design the fabric, or as I'm even designing the fabric.
Okay.
It's like, I'll think about that later.
When
But
it comes to it, I love that. So how many collections do you do a year at this point?
I typically do two, but the last few years I feel like there have been three. And I
Okay.
haven't intended it, but that's just how it's worked out. And yeah, so I don't even remember my exact count. I think I'm out to like 24 or 25 collections, which That
Amazing.
sounds weird to me.
Congratulations. That's
Well,
amazing.
thank you.
That's so cool.
Uh,
Well, I love that. I mean, I have just like absolutely enjoyed this conversation. And so I just wonder if there's maybe any like final words or words of encouragement that you would leave for other creatives to just, keep doing what they're doing.
yeah, I think just like I shared earlier, for me it was 5 minutes a day. But also, like another part of that story that I haven't really hit on is, I started out thinking maybe I want to blog, this is a huge thing. And I realized very quickly I want to create. I don't want blogging to be the main thing here.
Mm,
So then that kind of evolved, and I was like, maybe I will sell quilts on Etsy. I'll just make what I want and put it up for sale, and then I found people don't want to pay like what a quilt is really worth.
sure.
Also, the odds that someone's going to stumble upon this quilt and it's going to be exactly what they're looking for, that's, I found very quickly that they were very slow to move.
Mm.
And so it was like, well, maybe I'll do custom quilts. And I very, very quickly realized I did not enjoy that at all. I don't, you know, other people's inspiration and their color schemes, I was like not having a good time. So that's when I kind of segued to patterns. And I thought, well, I'll make whatever I want, but I'll write the instructions. It's a smaller price point. So maybe I'll sell more though that way. And so that's kind of how I got into the pattern writing. But I didn't even, nowhere in the beginning was I thinking fabric design is the goal or moda or
Yeah,
any of that. It just was kind of a meandering to sort of figure out, well, what do I like? Some people might love making custom quilts for people, and
sure.
that's great. We need people like that. So I think the point is my journey just I kind of had to just go along, and it was constantly evolving, and I had to be open to that. And
Mm.
eventually I got to exactly where I wanted to be. And so my advice is just to be open to the process. And um there's no you may surprise yourself. You may end up liking technical writing or something that is so needed in the industry that you didn't realize, and you're really good at.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And that goes back to like there's a need for everybody's talents and we just have to figure
Hmm.
out how to get everybody where they need to be because there's plenty of room for that. I love that.
Hmm.
So is there any other, maybe fiber arts or anything really that you're interested in dipping your toes in?
Well, I've thought about getting more into the cross stitching because I know that's really big, and I loved doing it as a kid, but
Yeah.
I've hesitated because it's like I just don't know when I'm going to have time to do it,
Mm.
and I've gotten to the point where because I've learned to be a little more balanced with my life. um, it's hard for me to want to give that up and potentially, be overextended and prone to burnout. So it's
Yeah.
something I've thought about, but so far I haven't gotten to it yet. But that's okay. I also, there's so many different stages of life. I still have younger kids, and at some point I'm like, I'm gonna have way more hours in a day, and maybe that's down the road, but for now it's not.
I say that all the time. I'm like, it's just not that time in my life. I still have teenagers at home that they run the schedule and keep me running ragged. So I totally relate to that. But what about like just to fill your bucket? Is there anything that you do
Oh.
outside of, quilting and design that if you're needing like, those creative juices filled back up that you like to do?
Well, I love getting out in nature. I live 45 minutes away from Zion National Park. I'm actually going
Oh,
this
beautiful.
weekend. It's so beautiful there, and so it's a good reset. There's so much inspiration. I One of my fabric lines came out of my love of Zion, and so I love to get out in nature. I love to be active. I love weightlifting. I love cooking. I love doing projects around my house. I'm constantly like reimagining like what, should I wallpaper this? Should I, so
I love
I
that.
have plenty of things for sure that keep me busy outside of quilting and sewing.
That's awesome. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for spending time with me today and just sharing a little bit of your story. Hopefully, we'll be able to catch up again. I feel like we could talk all day. So
Yeah.
I really
Me too.
appreciate you. Can you just share with everyone if they want to see more of what you're up to, where they can follow along and keep up with you online?
Yes, you can find me at Lella Boutique on social media. I'm on Instagram, I would say the most. I have a blog that's blog.lellaboutique.com. But yeah, I mean, come find me on Instagram, Facebook as
Awesome.
well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And hopefully, I'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Bye bye.